Hey everybody, Rick Gualtieri here, aka Silas Kane, aka the Arrow of the Gods, or aka however anybody pronounces my last name from week to week. And figured I'd take advantage of the fact that one, my office is almost clean for a change, and also the fact that, well, everybody's home and such, to do a few readings. And I figured, I've done readings of a lot of my books on my own YouTube channel. Why not do some Shingles reading? Because Shingles just exists as fun. It's for those of us who grew up, well, reading that other series, that maybe has to do with a much lesser disease, But we grew up, we got older, we got more bitter. We decided that we like stories, but we also like curse words, and we like people jacking off, and thus Shingles was born. So I'm going to be reading some excerpts from over the next couple days from my own. We'll see if any of the other guys want to read from theirs, or if they want me to read from theirs. I'm more than happy to do that. But I figured I'd take a stab and start us off with my first Shingles that I wrote, Gary's Children, which is Shingles Part 2, or Book 2. And it is available both in Kindle Unlimited, or via audio, and if it's part of the Shingles audio collection, Volume 2, narrated by the awesome Cal Wembley and equally as awesome Cassandra Miles. And after listening to me do this, you should pick it up so you can hear them do it right, because I'm not a narrator, nor should I be allowed to speak or read anything aloud. Some could argue I shouldn't be allowed to write things either, but we'll leave that as it is. So here it is, a random chapter from Gary's Children, Shingles Book 2. The Spank Bank. To say that Gary was stressed following his mother's visit was an understatement. The only thing that would have made this night worse was if the rent were due. Wait, it's the beginning of the month. It is due. Fuck! Scratch that. The only thing that would make it worse was if his boss pulled up and knocked on the... Knowing how fate was treating him that particular evening, he decided not to finish that thought. He was almost shaking from the ordeal, but then he felt a comforting weight in his hand and realized he was still holding the jacklight from when he'd picked it up. There it sat in his palm, almost as if it were smiling up at him. He stared back at it for several long seconds, mesmerized by the device. Pop was right. There was something special about it. That was all fine and well, but he'd settled for it taking his mind off the disaster of a week he'd had. Without any further hesitation, Gary walked to his bedroom and turned his laptop on. It wasn't long before he'd navigated some of his favorite vids, pushed his pants down around his ankles, and got to work. For all the things that had gone wrong that day, Gary was happy to realize that Pop hadn't been bullshitting him. The jacklight was tight, warm, and oddly moist. Strange, but it didn't detract from the experience at all. Hell, even the thought of Pop in all of his greasy, overweight glory couldn't stop him from achieving the nirvana he'd so desperately sought. Soon enough, all of his troubles emptied out of him and into the wonderful new device he'd purchased. It was as if, in that one brief moment, he was without a care in the world. That night, Gary slept the sleep of the truly exhausted. It was a deep slumber, one free of worries, at least for a short while. Gary rolled over at some point, consciousness gradually returning as his bladder cried out in need of release. He had no idea what time it was, but it had to be late because it was still dark behind his closed eyelids. The sound of tiny feet walking near his bed abruptly dragged him closer to wakefulness. "Go to fuck away, Chunks," he muttered blearily. There came a giggle, like that of a little girl whispering into his ear. Gary bolted upright with a start. He glanced around the dark room and saw nothing except the dim glow of his laptop screensaver. Rubbing his eyes, he reached out to the lamp next to his bed. Flicking it on with a quick twist of the knob revealed Gary's bedroom, empty as usual. There wasn't any sign of Chunks, but that wasn't a surprise. The cat usually liked to lounge out on the couch at night. His heart was still beating hard in his chest. It had sounded so real, but he realized that was ridiculous. So far as he was aware, there'd never been any kids in his place. Heck, the only females he'd ever had over had been his mother and Brenda, a woman he'd gone out with a few times before she'd abruptly broken it off with him. As for his mom, well, she sounded far less like a little girl than she did a 50-year-old chain smoker. Gary let out a nervous laugh. Why was he dreaming of kids anyway? What he'd been watching before bed certainly didn't have anything to do with children, short of maybe the phrase, "I've been a bad girl, Daddy." Feeling the urging from his bladder again, Gary swung his legs off the bed and stood, feeling an odd weight pulling on him from below. In a panic, he looked down only to see the jacklight still hanging off his now limp member. He'd apparently fallen asleep while still inside it. Damn, that's some grip. He pulled it off and put it on top of his desk so that he could go do his business and get back to bed. Waking up brought with it a healthy-sized timber of morning wood, one that Gary was happy to oblige. There were few better ways to start off the day as far as he was concerned. Once finished, he lay in bed for several minutes enjoying the afterglow, then decided to get up and start his weekend. There was a new superhero series debuting on Netflix, and this looked to be a perfect day to binge watch it. Despite his plans to not see another living person that day, outside of whoever was delivering pizza, Gary still took the time to shower, shave, and brush his teeth. Feeling refreshed, he stepped from the bathroom and was immediately glad he'd emptied his bowels earlier, because otherwise he'd have certainly soiled himself. Jesus Christ! After a few seconds, he realized perhaps his reaction had been a bit harsh. After all, it wasn't some thuggish burglar seated at his kitchen table waiting to slit his throat before making off with the few of his possessions worth anything. No. Sitting there was a young boy, more a toddler really. He looked to be 3, maybe 4 years old. The bigger questions were, what was he doing there, and how did he get in? "Good morning," the boy said brightly, grinning the stupid grin of a child not old enough to have developed anything resembling a modicum of rationality. Good morning," Gary replied, his eyes darting everywhere at once, just in case that burglar he'd imagined had brought his kid with him on this particular hit. The place was empty besides him, the child, and Chunks. The cat, for his part, was busy sitting in the living room window as if everything was right as rain with the world. Knew I should have gotten a guard dog instead. "Can I have some cereal?" the oblivious little boy asked, as if sitting in Gary's kitchen was the most natural thing in the world. "Where's your mom? Hell, who's your mom?" "My mommy's name is Brenda. Can I have some cereal now?" Yeah, sure," Gary replied, his body on autopilot as his brain continued to process the situation. He reached up and handed the child a box of grape nuts, then turned toward the front door. "Ew, it tastes like dirt." Pretend it's Captain Crunch." "This sucks." "You ain't whistling Dixie, kid." Gary unlatched the chain lock and opened the deadbolt. He gave Chunks a dirty look, then stepped out. The boy must have wandered away from his parents and then somehow decided that Gary's place looked friendly for whatever fucking reason kids decided anything. That meant he probably lived close by in one of the other units, perhaps. Although why his parents weren't out looking for their wayward spawn was anyone's guess. Maybe they were drunk. He looked up and down the street for anyone who seemed likely to have lost a kid, then spotted another possible explanation. There was a community pool right down the block from his place. Maybe a family had come for a swim and not realized one of their crotch fruit had wandered off. Sounded like a reasonable theory to him. Gary set off in that direction, certain he'd find someone who could claim the little brat so that he could get back to his Saturday plans. There. The pool employed a crossing guard on the weekends. She'd be able to help. As he headed her way, he considered what the kid had said about his mom. She had the same name as the woman who dumped his ass after only 2 dates. Small world, he thought, as he walked up to the crossing guard. "Heading to the pool?" she asked cheerfully, grabbing her stop sign. Not really my thing," Gary replied. "But maybe you could help me. I think one of the kids here might have wandered off." "I didn't see any unsupervised children." "Well, there's one sitting at my kitchen table right now. Came right in and asked for breakfast. I'm not really sure what to do. I was hoping maybe you could take him back and find his parents." The crossing guard, a 20-something redhead with a blotch of freckles on her nose, appeared to think about it for a moment. She glanced around, saw no one approaching, then looked back at Gary and seemed to make up her mind. "Okay, show me. I'll see what I can do." "Thank you so much." Sharon," the woman said, holding out her hand. "Nice to meet you." Gary," he replied offhandedly, leading her back to his place. With any luck, she could find this kid's parents and he could get back to his day. All things considered, he had a feeling he'd be breaking in his new toy again to help calm the weirdness that should have been a relatively sedate morning. "Here we are," he said, showing her in. "He said his mom's name is..." "Oh my God, your cat is so adorable!" Sharon walked straight over to Chunks and began vigorously scratching his ears. "Who's a fat kitty cat? Yes, you are!" Gary mentally kept count. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? You traitorous son of a bitch! Ignoring the cat, he turned and pointed. He is right over. The table was empty, and the chairs were all pushed in as they normally were. Shit. Kid? I don't see anyone, Sharon replied before returning to giving Mr. Chunks far more attention than the little bastard usually allowed. Hey, kid! Gary poked his head into the bathroom, then the bedroom, and finally the closet. There wasn't any sign of him. He took a few more minutes to search while Sharon continued to love up Chunks. Finally, he stepped back into the living room. He's not here. I guess maybe his mom popped in and got him. Sharon turned, smiled, and put one hand on her hip. You know, you could have just asked me over for coffee. You didn't have to make up some bullshit story. Coffee? Gary asked, confused. She stepped toward him, her grin widening. I do appreciate the effort, though. There's something to be said about a man going out of his way to charm a lady. He had no idea what the hell she was talking about, but all at once it struck him that she was actually pretty cute. Cute, standing in his apartment, obviously in love with his useless cat and wanting coffee. How the fuck had that happened? Gary wasn't good with other people, especially when it came to romantic pursuits, but he wasn't an idiot either. He knew he wasn't a bad-looking guy, just somewhat awkward, and with enough insecurities to fill up that community pool. All the same, he'd been around the block enough times and missed enough cues that his subconscious was at least on the ball enough to tell him that this woman wanted coffee, so he'd best get his ass into the kitchen and start making some damn coffee. If he ever saw that kid again, he'd have to thank him, after advising that he stay the fuck out of strangers' apartments going forward. That shit was just weird. Weird, but apparently lucky for him. Maybe lucky enough that he wouldn't need to use his... Ooh, what's this? Gary looked up from where he was busy shoveling instant coffee into 2 mugs and saw her examining the bookshelf on the far side of the living room, upon which lay his jacklight. Oh, shit. Realization dawned in Sharon's eyes, and she backed away in horror. Oh, Christ, dude! It's not what you think. Put that shit in a drawer or something. Like, save it for the 3rd date. She glanced back at it. Oh, God, it's dripping! I think I'm gonna be sick! Wait! Sharon shoved her way past him. Out of my way, perv! She stepped to the door and then looked once more at Chunks. Ugh, you probably wanking in front of your cat, too. Fucking weirdo. She stormed off, leaving Gary to watch as she walked out of his life as abruptly as she'd entered it, shouting curses at him as she marched back to her post. Realizing how this potentially looked to any passerby, he quickly shut the door. He was just re-engaging the chain lock when a thought hit him. Hold on. Wasn't the door locked earlier before I stepped out? He was almost certain it was. His neighborhood wasn't exactly a high crime area, but Gary tried to be diligent about locking up every night, regardless. No point in taking chances. He looked over at Chunks. I'm not going crazy, right? This door was locked, wasn't it? Chunks, for his part, regarded Gary as he always did, as if he were an inferior life form put upon this planet for no other purpose than to feed him and scoop out his litter box 3 times a week. At least the stupid cat hadn't called him a fucking perv, the very thing Gary had feared when he'd pulled into the parking lot of Titty City Bang Bang. Ironic that he'd left unscathed, only to be called out in his own apartment. He stepped over to the shelf and picked up the source of the crossing guard's disgust. Sharon was right. It was sort of drippy. More importantly, why was it out here? Hadn't he left it in his bedroom earlier this morning? I probably moved it when I got up and forgot about it. Stupid on his part, because it had cost him coffee and perhaps more with the first girl he'd had over in some time. For a moment, he became angry at the stupid thing, but then, just as quickly, he calmed down. This wasn't the jacklight's fault. It was just a dumb coincidence that he'd left it out on the one morning that a cute and seemingly willing female had been in his apartment. All because some stupid kid had somehow found his way to Gary's kitchen table. Must have left the window unlocked or something. The funny part was, despite it all, he was back to square one, no worse off than when he'd started the day. His weekend was still ahead of him, which meant there was no sense grousing over what could have been, or the weirdness that had led up to it. All right, and there you have a brief snippet from Gary's Children, Shingles Book 2. I'll post links to it in the comments below, and I will be back to do some more snippets, as this week progresses. In the meantime, I hope those of you who are staying home and such, you're staying safe. Keeping calm, staying healthy. Those of you who are out and about are likewise staying safe, and being cool. And if you're one of those many people working retail, deliveries, service industries, or healthcare, you have my thanks, because I think you're doing much more than any of us to keep the rest of us sane. Until next time, once again, I'm Rick Gualtieri, and this has been Gary's Children.